4,000 or so years ago, there was a guy named Job, whom the Bible describes as upright and blameless, who feared God and shunned evil. And he did. He treated his employees well. He loved his neighbors as himself. He loved God. He loved his family. He prayed for them every day. And God had been very good to him. He had lots of hired hands. He had thousands of sheep and camels and cattle and donkeys and huge tracts of land. Job had it made. And you would think that with a resume like that and with things going as well as they were for him and as faithful as he was, that Job would just live happily ever after. I mean, isn't that how the stories end most of the time if it starts once upon a time? That is how fairy tales end, but life is seldom a fairy tale. And though in the end, Job does live happily ever after, just like all of us do who have said yes to Jesus, the middle of the story is quite a different story. That's because unbeknownst to Job, he has an enemy who's coming to rob, to kill, and to destroy him, to steal his stuff, to kill him and his kids, and to destroy his relationships with his family and his friends. Now, the Hebrew word for enemy is Satan. Satan means enemy. That's what the word means. And Satan is indeed our enemy, the enemy of our souls, the enemy of our mind, the enemy of our relationships, the enemy of our bodies. And Job's enemy attacks all four of those in Job's life. And here's how that happens. Well, one day, all the angels show up to report to God what they've been doing. And Satan is among them, which shows that Satan is not stronger than God. Satan doesn't have his own throne room. Satan is not equal to God. He is ultimately subservient. Now you think, well, why didn't God just, smack him and squish him right there? Well, God is going to do that, and you can read about that in the last book of the Bible, Revelation. But between now and then, Satan has some degree of freedom, and he uses that degree of freedom to tempt us and to test our freedom and how we're going to use our freedom. Are we going to love God and live His way, or are we going to ignore God and do it my way? So God asked the angels, what have you been up to? And Satan says, well, nothing much. I've just been roaming around the world. Now he leaves out the part about looking for people that he can rob, kill, and destroy. And God says, how about my servant Job? There's nobody like him on all the earth. He's my best guy. And Satan says, yeah, because you made him rich. Take all of his stuff and he'll curse you to your face. And God says, you think so? I don't. Tell you what, do your worst. You may steal all of his stuff, but you're not allowed to touch him. Now, evil has power, but it's power on a leash. And just like a barking Rottweiler coming out after you, at some point it's going to go, ah! That's how it works. God says, okay, you can take all of his stuff, but you may not touch him. And so Satan does. He sends some bad guys to steal all of Job's stuff and to kill his employees. He sends lightning down to strike the sheep and burn them all up. And cruelest of all, he huffs and he puffs and he blows the house down where Job's 10 children are and kills them all. And Job gets the news and he sinks to the ground and he cries out to God, naked I came into this life, and naked I will leave it. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, did you hear whom Job thinks did all of that? But even though he thinks God did it, he hangs on to his faith, hope, and love. Well, the next day, all the angels show up again. God says, what you been doing? Satan says, been nothing much, just been roaming around the earth. And God says, how about my friend Job? He's still my best guy, even though you incited me against him without cause. And Satan snorts, yeah, skin for skin. A man will give everything that he has for his life. You reach out your hand and touch Job and he'll curse you to your face. God says, you think so? I don't. Okay, have at him, but you're not allowed to kill him. Once again, evil is on a leash. Often a leash that's further and longer than we would prefer. But when we find ourselves inside that leash length of evil, let's remember God's promises, that He is with us always, even to the end of the age, that God knows what He's doing, that He will not abandon us to the power of evil, that evil cannot ultimately harm or destroy us, and in the end, the devil does not win. Those are the promises of God, not the lies that the enemy tells us. God says, okay, stretch out your hand against him, but don't kill him. And the enemy does. He inflicts Job with open running sores all over his body, such that Job takes a piece of broken pottery and scrapes the scabs and lets the pus run to try to relieve his pain. Ugh. And worse than that, Job's wife says, Job, look at yourself. Why don't you just curse God and die? And Job replies, darling, God's been so kind to us for so long. Are we going to accept good from God and not trouble? Once again, whom does Job think did all of that to him? And even though he thinks it's God that did it, he hangs on to his faith, hope, and love. Well, word of Job's troubles spread out to the neighborhood, and 3 of his friends come to visit and cheer him up. And when they get there and they see him sitting in the dirt, scraping himself with a piece of pottery, oozing blood and yuck, they hardly recognize him. And they sit down with him for 7 days. And for 7 days they weep with him and they hurt with him and they sit silently. For 7 days, they are the perfect friends. Now, if someone you love has some painful mess, reach out to them in person or by phone or by mail. And you say, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just go. Just be with them. Just let them know you care. Cry with them, hurt with them, pray with them silently. Just be there. And that's what Job's friends do for 7 days silently. And then they open their mouths and ruin it all. And for 35 chapters in the book of Job, they tell Job, you must have really done something wrong to deserve all of this. Because if you were as good as you think you are, you'd be living happily ever after instead of scraping yourself with a piece of pottery. We know how God works. He sends good things to good people and bad things to bad people. And all of this bad that happens to you, you must have really been bad. Some friends, they were. Now, Job thinks that God did all this to him, and his wife thinks that God did all this to him, and his friends think God did all of this to him. Is it any wonder then that when we encounter trouble that we think God must have done that? When we hear that something bad happens to somebody we know, don't we often think, I wonder what they did to deserve that? Or when it happens to us, we think, wonder what I did to deserve that. And if we can't think of anything we've really done to deserve it, we ask God, why are you doing this to me? Because neither Job, nor his wife, nor his friends understood who really did it. It wasn't God. Because they don't even know that Satan exists. They assume that God must have done it. And like Job, and like his wife, and like his friends, too often we blame God for the devil's work. Don't we? Don't we? But it wasn't God. And Job didn't deserve it. Let the record show. When Job's life falls apart, it was not God doing it. He didn't deserve it. It was evil. It was the enemy. It wasn't God. And when our life falls apart or someone that we love, things go south, it's not God doing it. And you don't deserve it. and they don't deserve it. It's evil doing it. It's the enemy at work. It's not God. It wasn't God. That's hard to remember when that happens. But God does not do evil. God doesn't walk around slapping people and killing kids. That's not how he works. But God does work through our troubles, as we're going to see over the next 3 weeks in this story of Job. Now you're thinking, dang, 4 weeks on Job? That's a long time to spend on one person. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But the lectionary gives us 4 Sundays on Job because the story of Job is the story of us all. All of us. All of us, no matter how hard we try or how good we are, or how well we love God and our neighbors and each other, no matter how faithful we might be, all of us are going to have things stolen from us, have relationships go sour, and have people that we love die. All of us wonder, why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad people? And we all struggle trying to understand and make sense of the injustice and the cruelty in the world. And where does that come from? And all of us are going to be blindsided by evil that just seems to come out of nowhere. And some of us, when we're young, are going to get hurt or sick and die. And all the rest of us, well, we're going to get old and sick and die. It happens to us all. And it hurts. It hurts bad. It hurts so badly that every one of us at some point in our life, sooner or later, is tempted to curse God and die. Pain and frustration and suffering and disappointment are unavoidable aspects of life. It happens to us all. We live in a world that is bent and broken by selfishness and evil and sin, and we shouldn't be surprised when that bent and broken world bends and sometimes breaks us. So what do? Well, we can try to anesthetize ourselves with sex or drugs or alcohol or some other escapist nonsense. It doesn't work, but lots of people try. Or we can shake our fists at heaven and we can blame God for the sorrows and the injustice of the world, and we can curse God and die, and a lot of people have. Or we can learn from Job that in the inescapable difficulties of life, that God is there, that God is still working, that God is still working in us and around us and sometimes through us, and that God is working somehow to pull even just a little bit of good out of whatever tragedy that we are experiencing, thus that and such that in the end, maybe not until the very end when Jesus comes again in glory to judge the living and the dead, that we will live happily ever after. If not here on earth, at least in heaven with God and each other forever. And until then, let's trust God. Let's trust that God keeps his word, that God is with us always, even to the end of the age, that he's with us even when we feel helpless or hopeless, that he's with us no matter what evil has its claws inside of us, and that he's working to pull some good out of whatever horrendous event or circumstances that we're in. And until then, when we're tempted to blame God for our troubles, and we all are, or if we think we should be exempt from the troubles of the rest of the world because, we're Christians, we're God's children, it's not supposed to happen to us. When we're tempted to think that, let's remember Job. And let's remember what we heard today about Jesus in Hebrews. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make Jesus, the pioneer of their salvation, perfect through what he suffered. Job is not the only good guy that had bad things happen to him. Jesus did too. The most loving, the most faithful, the most selfless person in all of history suffered all the same troubles that we do and more. None of us have ever had nails in our hands and feet. And if it happened to him, why would we think it won't happen to us? And when we follow a guy who went to a cross, we shouldn't be surprised when we have to pick up and carry our own cross. And if Jesus was made perfect through what he suffered, why would we think suffering is not what it takes to make us perfect as well? If you are hurting right now in your life, if you're lonely, if you've lost someone you love to death or divorce, if you're suffering injustice or frustration or disappointment, if you feel like your life is falling apart right now, God's not doing it, and you don't deserve it. Let's not blame God for the devil's work anymore. Let's ask God for help. Let's hang on to faith, hope, and love and ask God for help. Let's look for the good that he's going to bring out of it somehow and someday. Now, this is just the first part of what God has for us in this story of Job. Please come back next week and the next week and the next week. And if your life is great right now, thank God. But come anyways. Because when God is blessing us best, that's when the enemy tends to do his worst. And when the enemy strikes, remember, it wasn't God.